Hello and welcome to the Donkere Kamer podcast. My name is Kaat Celis, founder of the Donkere Kamer, and in this podcast I interview inspiring photographers. My guest today is a documentary and portrait photographer from South Africa and has just won the Worl Press Photo Story of the Year with her story Valim Babena about dementia in Madagascar. A story she created for the German magazine Geo. Her work is all about identity, collaboration, and celebration. She is interested in using the medium of photography as a mode of co-creation and celebration. She is a member of Native Women Photograph and African Women in Photography. She has won several awards, among which a Worl Press Photo Award in 2023 and 2020, and she has published her work in major and well-known newspapers and magazines worldwide. My guest was born in Durban in 1986. Find out with me why she became a photographer, what she dreams about, who she looks up to, and what her next projects are. Welcome to the Donkere Kamer podcast with Lee-Ann Olwage. Hi, Lee-Ann. Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me and for the wonderful introduction.
That's just all about you. Welcome to my podcast and nice to meet you here at the Conscious Hotel Westerpark in Amsterdam. Olwage, Eda must be Afrikaans.
Yes, so my father has German ancestry and my mother has Dutch. So it feels a little bit like home being here, which is really wonderful.
Yeah, we could do it in our own languages, but let's do it in English.
Perfect.
You are here this week with all the winners of Worl Press Photo, a week full of workshops, lectures, celebration also. How was it for you until so far?
It's been really, really incredible. I think Worl Press Photo creates a space where photographers and the stories that we really care about can be celebrated. And I think that's so important in our industry where a lot of what we do is in isolation, and community is so important. And as things are changing in the photography world, to be surrounded by your peers, to have these critical conversations, to hear about challenges that your colleagues are facing in different parts of the world, it's such an incredible opportunity to connect, to inspire, and I feel incredibly lucky to be here and very grateful to Worl Press Photo for facilitating this.
Was it the first time, or did you already know these colleagues?
So last year when I came to Amsterdam, there were a lot of friends that were nominated.
Mm-hmm.
And this year it was a lot of work that I was very familiar with, but people that I've never met in person. So for me that was incredible to see the people behind the stories, to hear the process of creating the work, the dedication in the field, often spending years, long periods of time on a particular project. And it's always wonderful to meet the person behind the story because I think, we as storytellers, so much of how we tell stories is about who we are as people. And
why do you do what you do?
Absolutely. You know, so for me, that's just been absolutely wonderful to be around so many inspiring people that I really admire.
Yeah. And then you also feel that everyone is struggling.
Absolutely. It's not, I had such a great conversation yesterday about disappointments, and we all have them, but often what you see is only the good parts. And it's really good to know that all those things that happen to you that are hard, that are frustrating, that are disappointing, it's totally fine because it's all part of the journey and we all go through that. But it's good to kind of just bounce that off somebody once in a while. Yeah.
And also it's a constantly evolving industry and medium.
Absolutely. I think the landscape of photography is changing, and I think we're moving in a very good direction where there's a lot of attention on who is telling the story and why they're telling that, and that is so incredibly important. And as photographers, I think we constantly need to ask ourselves as well, there's this idea that photojournalists are the experts. People look at photography and it informs the idea of the world. So there's a big responsibility that comes with that. But it's also actually, when you're working on a project, initially you're the person in the room that knows the least. And you need to be able to put your ego aside and acknowledge that and go, I'm here, I'm a guest, I am going to try to tell your story through my lens. And knowing that kind of immediately puts it into perspective, and it opens you up to really listening, to questioning your own ideas of a story, and really challenging yourself as you create.
Yeah. If you say, why do I do what I do, or why you are using photography, or why you became a photojournalist, what is your answer?
When I started my career, I think like most photographers, I had this very naive idea that I could change the world. And
it's not naive.
I do still very much hope that my work has impact and meaning. But I've realized that I also create for me, because I have to. It's in my bones. It's
a calling.
I cannot not do it. And I think once I realized that a part of it is for me too, that kind of shifted in the way I thought about how I'm creating. And for me, it's my love affair with life. It's my way to experience all the goodness, all the joy, all the heartache that makes up this human experience, you know. And for me, that is an incredible honor to do that along with other people.
Yeah, I understand. And it also reminds me of yesterday. Yesterday was a ceremony where you received your award from Prince Constantijn of the Netherlands, along with the other winners, including Mohammed Salem, who received the Worl Press Photo of the Year award. But unfortunately, he needed to follow the ceremony, on a video screen, because he's stuck in Gaza. That was a really moving moment. But how was it for you? The other 3 global winners standing there and next to that screen.
I think seeing Muhammad on the screen and not being able to be here to celebrate with us just kind of reminds me of incredible dedication to his work, to the very harsh realities of telling stories in that area. And, you know, there's been so many deaths of photographers and journalists over the last couple of months. And, you know, we take images for granted, and you know, we don't always think about the person who's there on the ground and that trauma that they're faced with every single day, you know. We're a bit removed from it, where we can carry on with our lives, and that is somebody's life. That is what he's going through every single day. It was incredible to hear from him, to get an understanding of his experience. Also learning from Julia about the war in Ukraine.
Wow, what a story.
Incredible project. And Alejandro's work as well, which was really inspiring. So it really was an incredible honor to be part of that. And I think for me, what's been very special this year is that Valimba Bena to be nominated as the story of the year. You know, to me, this is actually such a quiet story. It's not breaking news. It's not a headline. It's a simple story about family and about loss and grief. But it is so universal. There's not a single person on this planet that cannot relate to that. And I feel incredibly grateful that the jury decided to award what is essentially a very simple story with this award. I mean, to me, that just means a lot. And it shows me the direction that the Worl Press Photo Contest is taking as well, which I think is very important.
Not only the harsh reality, the harsh stories.
Exactly. You know, our stories, Worl Press Photo is obviously the year in review, but our lives are made up of so many experiences, and to see stories from all corners of the world that people would often never know about or visit, you know, that to me is the power of storytelling, but also of a platform that creates a space for those stories to exist. Because if we don't have those spaces to put our stories, they kind of disappear.
Yeah,
you know?
That's true. And you were chosen out of more than 61,000 entries from nearly 4,000 photographers from one 130 different countries. Oh my God, what an incredible achievement! And yeah, congratulations. That's such an exceptional award. But you already won in 2023, 2020. So yeah, what does this award mean to you, or what did it? How did your life change after all these winning these awards, or not change maybe?
As photographers, I think our hope is always for our stories to reach a wide global audience and to start important conversations. And you could not ask for better than the exposure that comes with all the exhibitions all over the world. And to me, it means that this enables me to do more of what I love, and that is an incredibly wonderful thing. And it excites me a lot to know that I'm supported by a community, that the recognition gives a lot of attention to a story that I care about deeply. Because when you start a story, you have to care about it. Nobody else is going to. It's your job to then make other people care. And to see that people are interested, the way that people respond to this particular story. So many people come up to me and says, I can relate to this. My mother has Alzheimer's, family member. And to me, that is the point, that a family in a community in Madagascar so far removed from all the people I'm meeting in Amsterdam, there's that immediate connection because it's a human story.
And then again, there is.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe you need to explain what the story
That's probably
actually is about Valim Babena.
So Valim Babena is the third installment of a long-term project I've been working on called The Big Forget. And The Big Forget is a project about dementia in Africa and looking at how different cultures and communities understand the symptoms of dementia. And in many communities in Africa, those symptoms, whether it's mental health or cognitive impairment, those symptoms are often linked to superstitious beliefs or the belief in witchcraft. And this puts the elderly in a very vulnerable position where they are often ostracized from communities. They're feared by their own families. And
wow.
My grandmother had Alzheimer's, so and we had the kind of privileged position to be able to take a full brain scan to understand what is happening. And this made me think and kind of delve deep into how different communities perceive this disease, and how what I found was that in many local languages in Africa, there's no word for dementia.
Also in South Africa.
Also in South Africa. So how do you begin to talk about a disease that there's not even a word for? And then the other big stumbling block was getting a diagnosis. So many communities, especially rural communities, there's just no chance that somebody's going to be able to see a neurologist. So those are the first barriers to getting treatment. So when people don't understand what is happening, there's fear involved. And so I became interested in kind of looking at how people perceive disease, and I discovered that there's this very strong belief in the spiritual, and how disease comes both from a physical and a spiritual place, and therefore the way that it is dealt with and understood and treated falls into the realm of spirituality. What I also found was that there were these remarkable change makers on the ground in the form of local nurses who really had this incredible understanding of their own culture, of the same cultural beliefs they shared with the people they were meeting, but also being grounded in science, in medical knowledge. And they really bridged that gap for the families they were working with. And this to me is such an ideal solution. This is kind of a really good way to make those two worlds live in harmony. And so I initially worked in Namibia and Ghana, and then last year I had the privilege of going to Madagascar with Geo magazine. I started making contact in 2020 with the organization already. So it was a 3-year conversation, and then finally got to go, which was incredible. And
as a photographer, you also need to be patient. Absolutely.
And I also kind of believe that the stories want to be told, and they find the storytellers to tell them. And sometimes we need to grow a bit before we are ready to tell the story. And the moment you are ready as an individual, things just somehow fall into place.
Yeah.
And so I traveled to Madagascar last year. I met Muriel and her mom, who founded the only Alzheimer's organization on the island called Masondre Moody.
And they call it Alzheimer.
It's very interesting because in Madagascar, which is largely French-speaking and they speak Malagasy territory, nobody wants to be diagnosed with dementia because in French the word almost translates to demented. There's a very negative connotation.
Yeah.
So people get quite cross. When I was there as well, initially I said, does your father have dementia? And this was something that was not well received at all. Everybody was fine with the word Alzheimer's.
Oh, okay.
So there
because that's a disease.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's how we see how language can play such an important role in stigma, and how we speak, how we talk about things is so important.
And how did you communicate with them? In which language?
So most people spoke Malagasy. So Muriel and a local collaborator, Amir, really helped me. And so they introduced me to many families. But Farah and Dada Paul really kind of stood out for me. And then Muriel told me about the concept of Valimba Bena.
And what does that exactly mean?
So Valimba Bena kind of roughly translates to we are because of our parents. And the way Muriel described it to me is, she said, when you're a baby, your mother carries you on her back.
Especially in Africa.
In Africa. and then one day you get big, you get older, and now your mom needs to be carried. And it's the idea that we owe who we are to our parents. And what is wonderful is that it's kind of a way of life in Madagascar where society naturally takes on this role of caring for the elderly, which is a wonderful and a beautiful concept. Where that becomes problematic is when there's stigma and people do not understand what's happening to somebody with dementia and they fear them.
Yeah. And what did you do? What was your process? You followed that family for a few weeks, or?
So with Farah and Dada Paul, I was extremely lucky. Where I'd been speaking to Muriel for 3 years. We spoke about meeting them, but it was a Sunday morning when I first met them, and when I made the images that you see as part of the World Press Award, and it was just, there was this instant connection. They were absolutely just so comfortable with me.
Because you were already communicating for 3 years, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think what also changed the way I approached them was that my own father was diagnosed with dementia a few days before I left for the reporting trip to Madagascar. So,
wow, what an emotional situation.
Absolutely. So I think the place where I was creating from, everything that I was doing, I was thinking of Dada Paul. If I was photographing my own father right now, how would I do this? And often when you work in a community that you're perhaps not a part of, or where you can't even speak the language, it very much relies on how people feel around you, and whether they feel comfortable. And for us, there was just this instant familiarity, which was incredible, and it was just such an easy space to create in.
Yeah. Instant love and warmth as well, I guess. Or that is what I see in the images. And also the jury praised you mainly, well, because of the fact that you put dementia, on the global map, I guess, as a universal health issue. But also they praised you because of the way you did it, with a lot of love, compassion, and warmth. In a time where we perceive a lot of aggression and war, especially when you think of the story of, or the photo of Mohammed Salem. Do you think that is your strength as a photographer?
I hope so. I mean, to give you some context, when the project started 4 years ago, it all started with hearing about the story of Gina. My partner shared, I think it was a local newspaper article, about a Himba lady who was chained in her village for 20 years because her community feared her, and how she was eventually freed by a local Alzheimer's organization. And so I became curious about that, and I wanted to go and find Gina and understand what happened to her, why her community feared her in this particular way. I met her, and she was already living in a nursing home in Swakopmund, very far removed from her traditional community. And it was quite strange to meet her in that environment. She was eventually moved for her own safety. And then I decided to go and meet her family.
And moved a few 100 kilometers away? Or?
From her village.
Yeah.
And so I went to meet her brother, who is the king of the Himba. And I asked him about Gina, and everybody I met said that she was just always called the crazy lady, that everybody was scared of her, that they were scared at night she would practice witchcraft. So she was chained, physically chained in a hut for many
chained?
Yes, to a bed for many years.
Wow.
And so I wanted to understand why they did that and not just immediately go, well, that's a horrible thing. Of course, it's a big human rights issue. It's no way to treat people. But I wanted to understand why. And so I asked them. And they said, Kupika, her brother, said to me, well, there are others like her that are still chained, and do you want to meet them and photograph them? And I thought about that for a long time. And I decided not to, because that would be such a strong visual that if you saw that image,
vision.
Exactly, and you would always, it would be so strong in your mind that would be all you would remember. And doesn't matter how many other pictures I made after that, that would stick in your brain. It's such a strong, an image of treating somebody inhumanely. And so I said, no, this is not the way that I think I should document the story, especially working as an outsider in a community in Africa that I'm not a part of. Nothing about that felt right to me. Of course, then I was left with the question, so how do I tell this story? And it took me a really long time to figure that out. I made a second trip to Namibia a few months after the initial one. I made 2 reporting trips to Ghana and then a 5th trip to Madagascar. And with Valimba Bena 3 years later, I kind of finally felt like I found the way to tell a very difficult story about stigma, about how the elderly gets ostracized in a very tender and caring way.
And does it also affect your photographic style?
I think it does. I mean, so much of my previous work has been centered around collaboration and really celebrating the people that I photograph. When I started working with people with dementia, it was very difficult to collaborate. Before I could always have incredible conversations about the work. That was the power of digital photography. I could show the images immediately. I could ask people, what do you think of your image? What would you do differently? And really craft it together. For the first time, I was kind of in a position where I could not really do that. And so it was very important for me to still hold on to what my essence as a storyteller is. And for me, it was about never showing somebody at their absolute weakest and kind of lowest moment in life. So I had to find another way to do that.
Yeah, which you did.
Thank you.
Do you think you could also tell this story with your father as a main character?
So I've been thinking about that a lot, and when we got the diagnosis last year, the doctor said something that really triggered a lot of emotion for me. And she said, it's like the file room, which is the brain, is on fire. This kind of visual that came to mind of this loss of memory, and it really made me think about how our memories are our own history. They are our own stories. All the versions that we've ever been exist in our memories, or the people that have memories of us. And the minute that's gone, so are we, essentially. So there's definitely this feeling of urgency to work with my father, to create something to hold on to that memory, but also our collective history as a family.
Yeah. So maybe now it is still too close or too emotional for you to maybe photograph him?
It's interesting because that is always hard. it's hard to turn the lens on yourself and your loved ones, but I also think it's so important to do, because it definitely informs the way we tell stories. I remember photographing Dada Paul, and this is something that I've always believed, is that if I'm photographing somebody in a way that I wouldn't want to represent my own mother or father, why would I do that to somebody else's, you know? And I've always kind of held that as a way of creating. I think it is time for me to move closer to home with my work in terms of working with my father. And also it's a way for me to process the grief that comes with loss, that just, you know, when somebody passes away, there's an event and there's grief and loss, but it's something that's kind of more tangible. Grieving somebody over many years and losing them a little bit day by day with dementia,
while they are still alive,
exactly, is a very difficult thing. And I think that because photography for me is my way of relating to the world, it's an obvious choice in how to also process this.
Yeah, I can imagine. Still, it is a very universal theme, because a lot of people encounter relatives with dementia. So I think it's really important that you keep telling that story. Was this story, Valimba Bena, was it commissioned by Gio, or you started it and then I don't know.
It's a great question. So, like I mentioned, I've been in discussions with Muriel from Asandra Moody in Madagascar for 3 years, since 2020. So I always knew I wanted to go there.
Yeah.
It was always on the map. And, you know, it's always a bit strange as a photographer when you reach out to people, because I always wonder if they think, you know, now a year's passed or 2 years, what are you actually doing? Are you ever going to come? You know, so, and Muriel was so patient with the process of finding a way to come. And then I was doing a portfolio review with Lars Lindemann from Geo, who's just an incredible human. And he almost, I didn't even tell him much. I told him a bit about the project, and he was kind of like, what do you want to do next? And I said, I want to go to Madagascar. And I have the story. And he didn't even ask many questions about what exactly the story was initially. He just had this.
He was so confident.
He was trusting. And that to me was a wonderful thing. And so it happened in that way. I was very lucky to find a way to get there, even though it took some time.
Great.
And so it was kind of a combination of a commission, but based on a personal project.
Yeah, that's nice.
Yeah.
Cool. You won with a story, so I guess the edit is also very important. I suspect you are good at shaping your narrative yourself, or do you seek help?
Well, I actually feel really proud of myself for the edit of this particular project, because all the previous awards have always been for single images, and I know that I'm very good at making a very strong standout single image. So I knew that I wanted to grow more in terms of narrative and to grow a bigger story. And it's been 2 years of really seeking mentorship from editors, from friends, from people in the industry to grow that skill, because that didn't come to me that naturally in the beginning.
Okay. Yeah.
And so I think just kind of for photographers to know that asking for help is the best thing you can do, because
the most difficult.
Totally, because you cannot be an expert in everything. No. Some of us are good at certain things, and
you also have blind spots.
Totally, you know, there are so many gaps, and you're just too close to the story. So it's very important to ask for help to craft stories with. I always say build a community of visual friends or photo friends, because they're so important.
Yeah,
they really do help.
Yeah, absolutely. You said in the beginning you're working on the big
big forget.
Forget, in the continent Africa. So this is a work in progress. It's an ongoing story.
Absolutely. I kind of think of the Big Forget as a book, and I feel like I've now done 2 chapters.
It's a really intriguing title.
I'll tell you about that. 2 chapters in Namibia, 2 in Ghana, and 1 in Madagascar. And I don't feel like the book is done yet. There are quite a few more chapters that I'd love to add to it, just in Africa alone.
Yeah.
And then I think I'd also be very curious to continue the work in other parts of the world. Kind of see this as an extremely long-term or lifelong project.
Maybe,
even.
yeah.
And to tell you a bit more about the title, The Big Forget. So when I was starting the project in 2020, I actually reached out to Muriel from Madagascar, and I did the first interview. And I said to Muriel, well, I know that there's no real word for dementia, or there's, in the French, there's the word that doesn't feel very good. So how would you describe dementia? Because some people would talk about confusion, all these different words came up, and she said to me, Lee-Ann, it's like, she went quiet for a while, she said, it's like this big forget. It's like the biggest forget you can, and it felt like loss. The way she said that word, the big forget, made me feel this kind of...
And how you are moving your arms now.
Yeah, like that feeling of loss that is so profound.
Yeah.
And that is actually, it's thanks to Muriel from Madagascar that I found the name for the larger body of work.
Okay. And do you feel that, photography is... is how you want to tell this story and keep on telling this story, or do you feel that you need other ways to shape your narrative?
I think photography has always been my first love, but I'm definitely ready to expand into other forms of storytelling. What I'm very interested in is also to now move from storytelling to activism. So I'd love to partner with international health organizations.
Oh, okay.
One of the things I really would love to do is to make a screening tool that nurses from local communities can use to screen people where there aren't any doctors to diagnose, make that localized so that it's in the local language, and that those kind of questions, because when you go to a doctor and you suspect your mother has dementia, you would go, and there's a standard questionnaire that the doctor will ask. I met a nurse in Namibia who made that very specific to his community. So instead of asking, for instance, when your mother goes to the grocery store, does she struggle to find her way home? He would say, well, when your mother fetches water from the river, can she find her way to the village? And
yes or no?
Yeah, and he adapted this to his language, to his culture, to his community. And I'd love to partner, to find funding from a health organization, to partner with different local nurses to do these infographics that they can use for screening, and to really help put a tool in place that could help people find answers.
But why do you call that activism?
Maybe it's just, I always think when we work on a project, there's got to be an end, not a product necessarily, but a way that it lives. So sometimes it's an exhibition. Sometimes a book is always a good way for certain projects to be consolidated into a place where they live, a home for them. And for me, that feels like the final home of the story would be to leave that tool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How do you actually get to where you are right now, like working for major international titles, magazines, newspapers, being able to exhibit your work worldwide? Did you roll into this organically, or how did you end up here?
This is always a favorite question because it's such a messy answer, which is really fun. So I had a whole other life before this. I studied film directing and script writing, so I always knew I wanted to tell stories. Yeah. But then after studying, I had a big student loan, and
And where did you study this?
In South Africa, in Cape Town.
Cape Town, yeah.
And so I got an opportunity to work with an art director on movies, and I started getting into set decorating. And so I did that for 9 years, and I really loved it for a good while. So I definitely have a very visual and aesthetic background, which really informed my storytelling. I'll tell you a bit more about that later.
Yeah, because your pictures are, feels like
they've got a cinematic quality,
yeah,
you know.
they have.
And I do think a lot about color, I love, looking at what people wear and how to complement that with interesting parts of the environment. So I definitely think in a very visual way coming from that
and
background.
also the build-up of foreground, background. what you see in the middle. Yeah,
Absolutely. So that all came from working in the film industry. And so when I was 28, my partner at the time and I went to Indonesia on holiday. And he said to me, well, why don't we buy a camera and we take some pictures? And I said, what an awful idea.
Why?
Why would we do that? Why would we waste our money? And
like that.
Yeah, I was like, no, I don't want a camera. And so he bought it and he surprised me on the trip. And I was really cross with him. I said, you used all our savings. We were... Anyway, and then he got dengue fever and he was in hospital for a long time. And so I was stuck in alone and kind of feeling a bit strange in a foreign country and not quite sure what to do. And so I picked up the camera and I fell in love with it. It was quite instinctive.
And it was just a small digital camera.
It was an entry-level Canon, a very basic one. And so I loved it, but I didn't think of myself as a photographer at all. And 2 years later, as I turned 30, a good friend of mine passed away. And I think as we take stock, as we get older in life, I went to work and I kind of thought, well, what am I doing? I'm essentially making entertainment and I'm working on coffee commercials. And what am I really doing? I knew I wanted more.
More death.
Absolutely. And so I had heard about a group called the Black Mambas, who are an all-female anti-poaching unit in South Africa. And so I wrote to them and I said, I'd love to come and live with you in the bush for 2 weeks. I had an idea to do a story about them, but it was also more for me to be surrounded by strong women to figure out what do I do next, because I knew that where I wasn't where I wanted to be. And so I bought this old medium format film camera for this trip. And during my time in the bush, I kept phoning...
An analog camera.
An analog camera. I kept phoning the guy who sold it to me and I kept saying, Ivan, I don't know how to use this and I'm struggling a bit and can you help me? And eventually I drove him mad and he said to me, Lee-Ann, please just send back the camera. I'll give you back your money. You will never be a photographer. You are really bad.
Wow.
I was furious. I was like, well, that is really rude and I'm not sending back your camera. I think that made me determined.
Yeah.
And so after that, I went back to Cape Town and I decided that this is what I was going to do. And so I started assisting commercial photographers in order to learn about photography. I couldn't go and study, so I knew I had to learn the technicalities. And it gave me an opportunity to also do my own projects in between. And that's kind of where it all started. And that had a huge impact on the way that I photograph, because being surrounded by commercial photographers and working more in studio spaces, everything was about how do you make the picture? How do you light it? What do you say? What does the client want to say? What is the product that you're photographing, And it really made me think, because I always knew I wanted to tell documentary stories, but I wanted to kind of find a visual style that elevated those stories into a different space. And I think you can see it in my work that there is that influence of the set decorating background, of being very influenced by all of that, which is everything's very considered. And I want to tell beautiful stories. I tell very difficult stories, but I want them to look beautiful. I want the images to convey a feeling and
very considered. But then again, it's reportage. I mean, you have to work rather fast, I guess.
Absolutely. And I think that's where, coming from that background where we would design a set and everything would be placed there, and then dealing with
you control
life.
your own timing as well.
Exactly, and then in reportage, it's life. And life kind of gives you better aesthetics than you could ever make up in your mind. I mean, if you look at the story of Dada Paul, my favorite moment, he was getting ready for church and he was putting on this beautiful brown suit and everything. You could see he took a lot of pride in getting ready.
Is that the picture with the
hat? And then the final moment, as he was getting ready, he puts on this hat that says Victoria's Secret. And I just burst out laughing because I thought, I don't think he has any idea what Victoria's Secret underwear is about. And now he's wearing this hat to church.
But when I think of that picture, I see red. Yeah, that's what what I remember now.
Yes,
the head and the red.
The walls, the color of the walls. Yes,
so that's also very considered.
Absolutely. I think I was very lucky. Sometimes life serves you an environment that is just so interesting visually that you could never have have kind of dreamt that, you know. And so when I walked into the room, and it's a very small room that he shares with Farah and his granddaughter, where the three of them got ready for church, and everything about it was just layered with so many objects that gave you a sense of the family, religious icons. There's a calendar on the wall, the clothing, the curtains, everything, the clothing they were wearing, everything was just, it was them. It was just such a beautiful expression of them. And sometimes as photographers, we're very lucky and we walk into a space where everything's just so interesting.
Yeah, that's true. But back to my question,
yes,
about how you enrolled in this industry, and you use the word lucky a lot. So you're just going from one luck to the other. I
often use the word luck. And I guess maybe it's important to explain how I think about luck. I think we make our own luck, and I am very persistent. To give you some context, when I first started working, I did a story on yoga in Pollsmoor, which is one of the most notorious prisons in the world. And for 6 months, I stood outside Pollsmoor prison trying to get access. And so that's often the side of a story that you don't see, is all the work that goes into being. So to me, luck is showing up every day.
It's a manifestation.
Absolutely. Showing your commitment. And I think that's so important, because when we photograph people, we ask them to kind of show us some of the most vulnerable parts of their lives, you know, and that is not a right. And I think you have to show up and show your dedication to the story before you can ask for that. And that's very important, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And it's good that you mentioned that. I mean, being a photographer has also got a lot to do with perseverance, with,
Absolutely.
And being patient.
And also knowing, to me it's so important. I always think there are sometimes more pictures that I didn't make, just because it didn't feel right, or the moment it didn't feel like something to do. And I think that's important to remember. Just because you have a camera, it doesn't give you the right to use it. You know?
That's true. Yeah.
It's not a right. It really is a privilege. And I mean, it's an incredibly privileged look into people's lives. And that's a big responsibility. And in that way, I drive editors mad, because I'm so protective of my images. I always,
is it?
I think I'm a very difficult photographer sometimes. And rightfully so. I want to know how my work is being used. I want to know exactly what the context is, because somebody trusted me with their story. And I want to make sure that the way that's put out into the world is the best possible way that can be, you know. Sometimes it doesn't always work out that way, and sometimes we all make mistakes. We're human, and I think we must just always question and try better every day, and try our best in every moment.
So you control, or you check until the last bit when a story will be published, or how it will be placed on the page, or maybe cropped or not cropped? Or?
For me, the text is very important, the context. And often, we would work with, as photographers, we work with journalists. If you're together on the ground, that's always great, because then you can have these conversations. And it's so nice to have another storytelling partner who opens your mind up to things that you don't think about, you don't see. I love that. And especially Charlotte from Geo, who wrote the article for the Madagascar story. She was just the most enriching project partner I think I've ever worked with. She's just phenomenal. And that's very important to me. As in life, sometimes you get paired with somebody and it's not a great match. And, you need to kind of work through all these things and decide and have these conversations. But to me, it's very important. What is the story? How is it being used? These things matter. And we are closest to the stories. So I do think it's our responsibility to check these things and to make sure, because once it's out in the world, it's out in the world,
Yeah, and it will stay there almost forever. In the introduction, I said you were born in Durban. It's a few hundred kilometers from Johannesburg. It's far away from Cape Town, from the fashionable, arty Cape Town. So how was it growing up in Durban?
Durban's great. I just always think it's got quite a tropical, warm climate, which I really like. But I didn't spend many of my kind of initial years there. We moved to Lesotho after that, was still very small, where my father was working, and then we went to what was previously called Port Elizabeth. It's now Kobega, and then to Cape Town when I was around 10.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So kind of a bit of everything, which was nice. I think that kind of probably started my interest in different places. And
but did you get a lot of art and photography from home or culture?
No. So the part of Cape Town where I grew up, which is quite a conservative Afrikaans community, the school I went to was very focused on academics and sport. There were no language classes, no art classes, and I actually had a really hard time growing up in that community. I never felt like I belonged, and it's only when I started studying where this was this explosion of being surrounded by creative visual people that I finally kind of felt like I'm finding my place in the world. But it was not an easy journey.
No, but now photography feels like your medium to express yourself.
Absolutely. I think it's something that I live and breathe, and it consumes me. I mean,
that's a nice word.
I feel very sorry for my partner who, once I'm kind of on the go on a project, I will wake up at midnight and say, this is it. This is how we solve it, and it's every part of my being. And I'm very lucky to be in a relationship where I'm very supported in that, and where the kind of madness of being in this all-consuming headspace is celebrated and is seen as something that is special. And it's quite lucky, I think.
You live in Cape Town now?
Actually, recently we moved. We are now 2 hours outside of Cape Town, living in a wine-producing town in the mountains.
Nice.
I still commute to Cape Town very often for work, but it was just time for something different.
But how important is the place where you live? When you think of you being a visual storyteller or a photojournalist, how important is it where you are stationed, or maybe not important?
I think for most people it is quite important. I have a deep love for my country. I think we're an incredibly interesting mix of people, of cultures. So I feel very lucky to be positioned in South Africa, on the African continent. I love coming from that space, and I think that has really shaped also how I think about storytelling, how I'm very aware of my position as a storyteller in different communities.
Yeah. You talked about luck, or being lucky, or perhaps it's just your calling in this life. But what would you advise young photographers to do when they are at the beginning of their visual career?
I think one of the most important things to do is to work on personal projects, to establish your own voice, to figure out who you are as a storyteller, because the way you see is really your superpower, and that's what makes you unique. There's an abundance of photographers out there, but only you can see the way that you do. And so, it's very interesting. I remember when I got my first assignment from National Geographic, and the first thing I did was, start paging through all these National Geographics. I was like, well, now I need my work.
What do they want?
What do they want? And then somebody said to me, no, they want you for the way that you see. And that's why they hired you, So it's so important to really build a visual community, figure out how you see the world, what is your voice, and really nurture that. I think that's very important. Second thing is, somebody once said to me, you have to throw a lot of darts at the board and eventually something sticks. And I can tell you, I've been very lucky to have my work celebrated numerous times. But I can also tell you that out of 100 things that I apply or emails that I send, I maybe get 2 or 3 yeses. So don't be despondent about the no's. They're so a part of your journey. And the first year that Belinda's image won the World Press Award, or my first World Press Award,
in 2020.
In 2020, that year I entered that body of work just about everywhere. And in some places, it won. And in other contests, it didn't even make a shortlist. And it made me realize that that's just not the right space for your work. That's totally fine. So find the spaces that align with your work.
Yeah. Absolutely. But often it is a financial struggle. Because, if you are working on your own projects, you also need to,
It's a fine balance. I always say that I take on certain work that buys me freedom. So I take on work that pays the bills. You don't necessarily see all of that on my website or in my portfolio. Doesn't mean that I don't enjoy it. And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But, take every opportunity you can and then find those things that will buy you the freedom that you crave to do the things you love, and find a way to set your life up in kind of a clever way where you're able to do that. It's not always easy. And
does it mean that you're still working in the fashion industry or in the film?
No, that is something that I absolutely had to break up with completely. But do whatever you can. A lot of photographers I know have completely other avenues of income, and that is quite liberating because it means that when you photograph, I always kind of thought, I don't want to photograph every day to the point that I start hating it. So if you find other ways to make money, I think that's great. But you need to. I think in this particular day and age, it's a harsh reality, but there are very few who can purely make a really good living from just being a photojournalist. It's not sustainable, which is a sad state of affairs, but find other ways to make that work. You've got an incredible skill set, so do other things. It could be in photography. It could be something different. Don't put that pressure on yourself to just do this one thing. Do whatever you need to do as much of what you love.
What a positive way of looking at a very difficult and sometimes fragile medium, the one of photography. To wrap up, Lee-Ann, because you have a really busy day today. I know you're working on The Big Forget, but are you also working on other projects right now?
I am. So I've been working on a long-term project about girls' education in Kenya and child marriage and female genital mutilation. Called, it's quite it was a very heavy project. It's called The Right to Play, and I'm working with a school called Kenya's Dream, who are working to keep girls in school, and they work with parents and cultural leaders to put an end to child marriage and FGM. And that to me is just a wonderful project to be involved in, a wonderful community and organization to be working in. And
that's in Kenya.
That's in Kenya. Yeah. And then I'm also doing a really, really wonderful project on female seaweed farmers in Zanzibar with an organization called Mwani, and they are working with local women to make skincare from these seaweed extracts. Really incredible group of women. I love stories about women. I think that's kind of a theme that comes through a lot. Or female identifying individuals. And they're producing a local project, or is it also available in Europe? So they've just infiltrated the luxury skincare market in Europe and the US, which is amazing. And what they're doing is it's this incredible combination of indigenous knowledge and science, and the kind of the science of skincare. And I love it because everything about their work, the way they farm the seaweed is linked to the tides. It's kind of the cycle of womanhood. It's our cycle and ritual of skincare, and to see that coming into a space of luxury. I was recently asked by Vogue to photograph the farmers, and that is so cool. I mean, to put those women, on the pages of Vogue, that is something that excites me so much, and I love that.
Yeah. So it's a commissioned project, or
it also started as a personal project. Kind of
same,
always does.
Yeah.
And then, so I worked with Mwani 3 years ago, and then they said, well, now Vogue wants to do a story on us. Would you be willing to come and photograph it? So also good for photographers to know that when you work on projects that you are passionate about, it will at some point get noticed, and it will lead to other things. So follow those things that excite you.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. And maybe I'll meet you again next year when you when you will receive an award with this new project. We'll never know, but you have a subscription here in Amsterdam. Thank you, Lee-Ann, for your time. Here in Amsterdam, it is an immensely busy week for you. Thank you also to you, listeners, for your fine comments on the podcast. We are in the final sprint to opening of the exhibition Water by Canadian photographer Edward Burtynsky. Hope to see you there this summer at Scharpoort in Knokkeheist in Belgium. Tickets can be found at waterexpo.be. And if you find these talks interesting, please give us 5 stars in Spotify or leave a review on Apple Podcasts so we can appeal to more people with this platform. I'll also put the link of the exhibition in the description and put Lee-Ann's details here too. So that's it. Until next time.